Hello, beautiful sacred souls. Today we are going to explore spiritual awakening without hierarchy, how we honor many paths while walking the ethical edge of change. There is something important that I want to name with honesty, deep humility, and care. In some of my earlier teachings, I may have implied, directly or indirectly, that transcendence-focused spiritual paths were somehow less valid than embodied, trauma-informed, integrative ones. And while my intention was to protect those who have been harmed by spiritual bypassing, I now see that this framing may itself have unintentionally created hierarchy. At the same time, I want to speak openly about a tension I still hold, because it is real, ethical edge I walk in my work. Even when I try to honor everyone exactly where they are, I sometimes use language like healed or unhealed, integrated and unintegrated, regulated and dysregulated. I do this not to create superiority, but to name patterns of suffering and harm, both personal and collective, and to advocate for change. And this is a delicate line, because how do we honor free will, dignity, and difference, while also naming what causes harm and offering pathways toward less suffering, without shaming someone who's in a different place? There is no perfect answer to this. There is only conscious intention, humility, continual self-reflection, and the ability to repair with someone if they feel like they've been harmed by one of your teachings. Here is the ethical tension of healing work. When I speak about healing, I try to hold this truth. It is okay to be exactly where you are. And if you are ready, there may be a gentler, safer, more integrated way of being. Both can be true at once. Honoring someone's present state does not require pretending that all states create equal safety, connection, and well-being. It does honor that some people might be in a state that is causing you or others harm. And it is important to advocate for growth, but in a way that does not require shaming, pathologizing, or ranking. This is the ethical edge of healing work and leadership. How do we name patterns that cause suffering without creating shame, which we know causes harm to the psyche? How do we invite growth without imposing hierarchy, which we know from a trauma-informed perspective takes away autonomy? I don't always get this perfectly right, and I am willing to keep learning. I want to name something, and that is where harm enters spirituality. Harm enters spirituality when spiritual frameworks become hierarchical or shame-based, when awakening is framed as higher versus lower, implying that those that are in a lower state are somehow less than those in a higher state. Evolved versus unevolved, again, implying that you're somehow better because you're evolved and awake, and somebody who's unevolved is somehow evil. Conscious versus unconscious, applying that those in the unconscious state are somehow not as valued as those in the conscious state. Ascended versus wounded, which takes away the value of the wounds and pathologizes them and makes it difficult for us to understand that the wounds are not the problem. The problem is when we react from the wounds from an unhealed state. Sometimes we subtly recreate the same systems of shame, exclusion, and dominance that I believe spirituality is meant to heal. Awakening is not about rising above our humanity. I believe it is about including our humanity with compassion. And I believe that any teaching that promotes shame of emotional processing, or pathologizes trauma responses, or invalidates embodiment, or judges where someone is on their path, or says that some spiritual paths are better than others, is not actually awakening. I think it's spiritualized survival strategy. It's helping us feel comfortable with the choice we've made because we're uncomfortable with where others are at. I don't think transcendence is wrong. Although I've said that transcendence can lead to spiritual bypassing, it doesn't always by default. Transcendence can be deeply regulating, liberating, stabilizing for many nervous systems. And for some, transcendence provides relief from suffering, access to peace, spaciousness beyond identity, grounding in awareness, and profound spiritual connection. These are valid, they are real, and they are sacred. And at the same time, for others, especially those with trauma histories, attachment wounds, or nervous system sensitivity, transcendence without integration can feel unsafe, destabilizing, dissociative, or shaming. This does not make transcendence wrong. It simply means that it may not be the right entry point for everyone. Awakening is not a one-size-fits-all. In my work, I do try to walk a careful ethical line to honor fully where someone is, while also speaking honestly about what helps reduce suffering based on my lived experience and my education. This means sometimes I describe nervous system regulation, trauma integration, emotional processing, and spiritual practices as healing. Not because someone is broken without it, but because these processes do reduce harm, increase safety, and expand capacity for connection. I do not believe anyone is defective or evil. I do believe trauma shapes behavior. Deregulation influences perception. Survival strategies can unintentionally cause harm. Healing does increase choice. Naming this is not intended to be hierarchy. It is, I believe, compassionate realism. But I also know how easily language can slip into judgment. So I hold this question continuously for myself. Am I naming patterns to reduce suffering or to somehow feel like I am right? The first comes from my observer consciousness, my heart-centered soul. The second comes from my own unhealed wounds and my ego. It isn't wrong for my ego to want to feel right. That's part of my humanity, but that might unintentionally cause harm to someone else. So I aim to name patterns to reduce suffering from a heart-based space. However, I do still have an ego, even though it mostly works with me in a healed way. This is a spiritual practice in and of itself. Integration and transcendence are complementary rather than opposites. Transcendence and integration can be partners. Transcendence offers spacious awareness, detachment from rigid identity, access to peace. Integration offers nervous system regulation, emotional healing, relational repair, embodied safety. Together, I think they create wholeness. Some souls arrive through transcendence, and some arrive through embodiment, and some, like myself, weave between the two. All are valid. So here is a more inclusive vision of awakening. What I now aspire to teach is awakening is not about becoming someone new. It's about becoming more fully who you are, safely, compassionately, and consciously. Your path may look like meditation and non-dual awareness, trauma therapy and parts work, prayer and devotion, embodiment and somatic healing, mystical exploration, nervous system regulation, energy work, relational repair, meaning making, and many more. None of these makes you less or more awake. What matters is, does this path increase compassion? Does it expand safely? Does it reduce shame? Does it reduce harm? Does it support wholeness? If yes, it is a sacred path. When we step into the role of teacher, mentor, guide, or offer insight, it is important for us to walk a constant ethical edge between honoring and challenging, validating and inviting, witnessing and advocating, and to be aware of our own unhealed wounds and when they come into our teachings, and then to name them. I do not claim perfection. I am constantly making mistakes and learning from them. I claim commitment to humility, learning, and repair, because I believe true awakening does not divide, it includes. And I also dare to imagine what would reduce suffering, what would expand dignity, what would deepen safety, what would increase love, holding both, compassion for where we are and hope for where we could go. It's not hierarchy, it is care. So you might ask yourself, where does my nervous system feel safest learning and healing? What path genuinely supports my capacity to stay present, compassionate, and grounded? And can I honor that without judging others who walk differently, without shaming others who have a different perspective? That, to me, is what true spiritual maturity looks like. If this resonates, I hope you'll consider liking or subscribing or following or sharing or maybe even commenting so that we can build community and understand one another more deeply. Or if you want to explore more of my teachings, I invite you to read my book, The Divine Within, Healing Ourselves to Heal the World, which offers many paths to healing and spirituality through different lenses and offers the perspective that you have to find the right one for you, while offering some tools that you might find helpful. Or you might go to my website, blossomingheartwellness.com, and sign up for my newsletter so that you can find out about other offerings and online courses. I'm sending you each deep love. For wherever you are on your journey of healing and awakening, it isn't better to be awake or asleep. Being awake sometimes means we cause less harm. Being asleep means we sometimes cause harm. Sending you deep love.